When you're ready, AJ.
I am ready.
I will call the Springfield City Council work session to order with roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon,
Here.
Councilors Pitts,
Here.
Moe,
Here.
Rodley,
Here.
Stair,
Here.
Woodrow,
Here.
Pictionary.
And Councilor Pictionary is excused for the evening. We have one item tonight, which is the Eugene Springfield Fire Consolidation Update with Chief Heppel. Hello, Chief.
Hello there. Are you ready for me to go, or is there
I am ready for you
an
to go.
intro, or okay?
You're the whole entertainment, right? Like,
I'm the warm up and the show. Here we go. All right. Thank you, Mayor. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you. All right. Mayor, Councilor, City Managers, good evening. Chris Heppel, I'm the interim fire chief for Eugene Springfield Fire. And here tonight to give you an update on the consolidation of Eugene Springfield Fire. You should have received a short AAS on this, as well as the slides before this evening that I'll be using. Some of the topics I'm going to address this evening. We'll talk a little bit about the history of Eugene Springfield Fire and the functional consolidation and where we're at today. We'll look at our total service area where we're providing operations on a daily basis. We'll take a look at some of the finance pieces as a consolidated organization. We'll also look at some challenge areas that we deal with on a regular basis, as well as many successes that we've seen over the years of the consolidation. And then I'll provide just some thoughts going forward. And then I'll certainly open up to questions at the end. From a historical perspective, what's been the overall objective of the functional consolidation and potential eventual merge of the organization is first enhance our service effectiveness as well as safety, and that's safety for our community, as well as the firefighters themselves and folks working the line every day. The other piece is moving towards standardization of service delivery. Just from a equity perspective, every community member, whether in Eugene, Springfield, or in one of our 7 contract districts, receives the same level of service as everyone else. The other piece is to improve some cost efficiencies. When we start to reduce things down to single supply lines, one EMS chief, one fire chief, those types of things, we wanted to take advantage of and improve some cost efficiencies there. A couple of things, just as we talk about just some terminology, many times folks will use the same term and try and understand the same thing. So I'm going to start with some definitions. Just to begin with, we as an organization started as 2 separate organizations. So we were literally units apart from themselves. And then we started coming together just over a decade ago. And we consider ourselves consolidated around 2014. And that's when the line, so those folks who are working on the engines, the trucks, and the ambulances every day, work together as a single unit, regardless of the employer. They could work in any station. And so consolidation is where we're at now, where we combine a number of things to work in a single, more effective and coherent whole, as a coherent whole. And then certainly one of the directions we could go is for a full merger, and that is where we combine or bring everything together in a single entity. And so right now we are considered a consolidated, for me, we are considered a consolidated organization as we continue to operate. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on this next slide. So if we go all the way back to 2007, yes, 14 years ago, the concept of being a consolidated organization came around, and it started at the operational level. First, to increase our efficiency across the geopolitical boundary, or simply the city limits of both cities, because we had 3 separate battalions. And so each battalion is made up in our system as anywhere from 5 to 6 stations. Each of the battalions is supervised by a battalion chief on a daily basis. We have 2 battalions in Eugene, and we have 1 battalion in Springfield. And so when we bring those together, we call that the 3 battalion or the third battalion system. The way they're numbered today is battalion 1 and 2 are in Eugene, and 3 is in Springfield. And so both organizations started operating while maintaining their separate identities. across lines just to improve service delivery as a whole and also for firefighter safety. In 08 and 09, we started having some joint elected officials meetings where we talked about a functional consolidation as well as improvements to the ambulance transport system. We continued to move forward with integrating some responses with our standardized metro operating procedures. We call them SOPs. So that again, we're more and more in alignment with the way we operate on a daily basis. And then around 2010, 2011, we did the first MOU or Memorandum of Understanding where a single fire chief was over both organizations. So that corresponded with Chief Murphy's retirement. And then at the time, Chief Groves became the chief over both organizations, yet still very separate organizations. About a year later, we saw another MOU that started to combine what some would call our support entities, so fire prevention, investigation, training programs, et cetera. We started to see those functions or divisions within our organization come together and operate together to provide standardized services. We also started to dabble with taking battalion or division chiefs at the time on the Eugene side, putting them in Springfield, and also bringing over some folks from Springfield over into the Eugene side so we could start gaining some experience from the top as we move down through the organization. In 2013, we saw billing was merged, so we now have a consolidated billing organization or unit as we still do today. And then in 2014 was the big move. We had moved forward with one single contract for the firefighters. And in August of 2014, so almost 7 years ago, is when all of the firefighters, engineers, and captains and battalion chiefs on the line were assigned to the appropriate stations, regardless of who their employer was. And we continue to operate in that same capacity today. Since 2015 and up until 2021, we've just continued to focus on efficiencies to improve our level of services. We've tried to reduce the number of types of computer systems and applications that we use. We've also just streamlined many of our normal internal processes as a whole. So that's been our history, our historical timeline for the consolidation to this point for Eugene Springfield Fire. If we're to take that and put it into 4 phases, first phase would have been the 3 battalion system and really bringing things together. Phase 2 was really starting to bring us together as a functional consolidation. So that's where 2 government entities working together for a common goal. And we would do that through what's called an IGA or an intergovernmental agreement, or what's also called an ORS 190 agreement. We continued on to phase 3, which was to operate as a functionally consolidated organization under the moniker of a single department, which is Eugene Springfield Fire today, to help normalize our workforce. We're more integrated scheduling, logistics, and also moving towards more common record management systems. And then the 4th phase, which would be a final phase, would be a merged form of governance for the organization. But right now, we're at this phase 3 point right now. If you look at our service delivery as a whole, we actually service about 287,000 citizens over 1,500 square miles. Yes, that's much larger than the geographic city limits of both Eugene and Springfield. But we have our 7 contract districts, as well as our ambulance service area. If you didn't know, goes quite a ways up the Mackenzie Highway. And then we have a pretty large area over on the Eugene side as well, but certainly not as large as our Springfield ambulance service area, which that Highway 58 corridor, and again, all the way up Highway 126 up the Mackenzie River. So quite a ways up there. Our fire suppression, rescue, and EMS response within the cities and our contract area is about 92 square miles. Again, our ambulance service area is about 1676. Calls for service. In fiscal year 21, we saw almost 40,000 calls. And in fiscal year 21, we saw just over 40,000 calls. For this year, if you're just looking at the numbers, we have them broke down into 3 categories. The top line or the red line is our EMS calls for service, which account for about 80 to 85% of all of our calls for service. The next line is our non-fire type calls. So this could be like hazardous materials, water rescue, lift assist, public assist, those types of things. And then the last line is our fire calls. And so we're still, we had a change in our data management system this year, so we're still tweaking our numbers. We know the whole numbers are pretty close, but we'll be tweaking them for accuracy here in the next couple of days as we finish up our annual report. But we did see certainly a rise in number of fires in FY21. Just want to make sure that they're that high. Remember I talked about the 3-battalion system? And again, we work across both cities in this fashion. And this graphic here just shows our general layout of not only the contract districts we serve, but also where our fire stations are located. If we want to talk about funding or the finance for the department. So this is for the department as a whole. So we'll look at the first pie chart on the upper left-hand corner. About 73% of our funding comes from general fund. We have a small portion that comes from the Springfield fire levy. We've got some building permits as well as the airport. On the Eugene side, we do operate the second busiest airport in the state of Oregon. So we have a full-time aircraft rescue firefighter team or crew out there. And then we also, about 20% of our revenue comes from ambulance services. If you bump down to the horizontal graph right below that pie chart, the first one is our general fund breakdown and where do things funding predominantly comes from. In terms of our tax base is about 91%. 7% come from our fire districts because they're, like I said, those are contract districts, so we receive reimbursement for service to those areas. And then about 2% is our permits and fees. Now, ambulance services is a significant amount of what we do as well. Remember, it's 85% of our calls and certainly has a large impact on our funding. If you go to the next bar down, our ambulance transport fee component here, we get about 68% comes from actually doing the transports and reimbursement. Medicare and Medicaid are our largest reimbursement or largest payers is the term that we use here. Fire med accounts for about 8% of it. Our beginning working capital at the beginning of the year usually accounts for about 1%. We have GEMT money, which is ground emergency medical transport funding, which we started to receive a couple of years ago. That is for funding to help us make up the difference between our Medicaid patients or our Oregon Health Plan patients and cost to provide service. And I can certainly go into further if you'd like on that. And then certainly our recoveries fees as well. So this is where we go out for service for motor vehicle accidents, use of flares, minor equipment, lift assist, etc. You'll also notice there a transfer in. So that was on the Eugene side where we saw a infusion of funding from the general fund as well as the newer community safety initiative funding. So that covers all of our funding sources. On the left-hand side, if you slide over to the right side is our expenditures. So about 87% of our expenditures are in personnel costs. About 7% are M&S, or materials and services. A slight amount, and this was just for this year coming up, we don't have a whole lot of capital outlay. That would be different. We looked at last year where we did have some more significant capital outlay. We also have our indirect service charges and then our dispatch fees. So overall, Eugene is just under about $50 million. Springfield is about $21 million for a total of about $70 million for our total budget for Eugene Springfield Fire. Looking at some current challenges of the phase 3 to phase 4 transition. Just with our current governance model, it certainly presents some challenges across the different areas. And in this particular case, I highlight 3 different areas. One is employee equity, the next is HR policy, and the third is standardization of service. And you'll notice that in many of these cases, they can be or be perceived as being overlapping. So probably one of our first ones is one of the challenges with just having 2 separate employers can sometimes be an issue. That drives some differences between payroll systems. And then we have multiple labor agreements. So for us, we have 4 separate contracts within our organization that are managed. We have 6 separate labor/management groups. And we experience challenges while on the line. It's really simple to move a firefighter from one station to another. When we start talking about our administrative staff, it becomes much more difficult because they're assigned or employees of a different employer. Next one, just kind of moving around in a clockwise turn here, just some pay disparity, whether it's between benefits, insurance, employee resources. Certainly much of that can be driven by the different labor contracts and again, separate employers. We also see some differences in permit fees between the fire marshal's office. And we know that there's some frustrations with, like, say, contractors as an example, who is like, well, why does it cost me this in Eugene for the same permit as it costs for me over in Springfield? That just doesn't make any sense. And so there are some disparate challenges there. Contract and purchasing processes are different between the two cities. While we've gotten a little bit better over the years, still in the end, it's two separate contracting systems. And then certainly IT issues and challenges. As simple as it could be with emails to what computers are operating and how they operate in Springfield may be different than the way that they're used and operated in Eugene. As a Springfield person, getting access in Eugene computer, et cetera, those types of, I would say many of us experience in the IT challenge world. So those are some of the challenges that we experience here as we live in phase 3 and then move towards whatever phase 4 may be. But certainly we've had a tremendous amount of successes that are associated with that. And in this piece, whether it's standardization or gain through efficiencies and shared strengths, we've had consistency of operations. What is probably the best part is our community members are receiving the same level of service every time that our system can support. And so that's just awesome and amazing. Code application, while the prices may be different, we do our best to standardize our code application as well as training, our EMS equipment, fire equipment, et cetera. And we've also developed a more appropriate tiered ambulance response. And that's been our effort over the last few years to get the right patient, the right patient to the right resource to the right level of care via the right mode of transportation. So I call those our patient rights. Efficiencies, we've had reduced time at structure fires because we have the ability to put more people on scene, mitigate the fire, clean up from the fire, and get those units back into service. Single training. I talked about supply, order, distribution systems, as well as admin. Some other shared strengths is our interoperability and depth of resources. We can reach back or reach deeper into our pool and bring them forward, whether it's for major incidents or general alarms, or even supporting conflagration across the state. We've also modified our computer-aided dispatch pieces, so it doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in. It's going to start picking the closest, most appropriate apparatus for your emergency, regardless of geopolitical boundaries. Talked a little bit about surge capacity already, and then also a system for sharing reserve apparatus. Does Springfield need to have a whole nother ladder, reserve ladder? If Eugene has one and we have 3 ladder trucks, and can we just use those around, or trucks, however that works. So we've been able to reduce our reserve fleet a little bit, which certainly saves us some money because we can share equipment across the board. So going forward, considerations certainly for the direction is we can, as an organization, we are continuing to function as a consolidated organization to this day. There could also be some considerations in the future to move towards more of a single budget, single employer, single governance model. And certainly there's an option to discontinue the functional consolidation. And there could be some other things in between there as law or rules may apply. But overall, our focus is on providing standardized delivery of safe and effective service at a more efficient cost. And I think we've certainly done that, certainly from the standardization delivery and safety perspective. And so I'll end with 2 things. One is our next steps. We are currently, just so you know, we finished an updated version of our intergovernmental agreement. That's being reviewed with legal right now. And as soon as that's done, we'll move those up to the city managers for consideration. Basically, the updates that I've made with the team this summer was to just have the IGA reflect more of how we're operating today for us to be more efficient and hopefully break down some barriers. I certainly make a recommendation, as I did to the Eugene side, was create a joint jurisdictional oversight committee. I know that Mayor Van Gordon has assigned a couple of council members to that. Just looking forward to maybe starting that committee up sometime in the near future. As you know, I'm the interim chief, so we'll continue with our chief recruitment process. So we did one this summer. It looks like we're going to take a little bit of a hiring pause, and we'll move forward probably with another process in the future under the direction of the city managers. Now, I dropped a whole lot of information on you in a very short period of time, so I will send you home as any good person would, with plenty of reading. If you want to read a little bit more in depth, or you've got specific questions, we do have our annual report, our latest annual report, which closed out in July. Hopefully we'll be posting in the next week or two. We also completed a community risk assessment last year, and this goes across both cities as well as our 7 contract districts. And last year, we also updated our standards of response coverage for our whole system. And basically what that does is that tells us what capacity capabilities and what we can do. It also addresses things that we can't do as well, just from a liability perspective. With that, Mara, I'll turn it back to you, and thanks for the opportunity, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Chief. Leonard?
Thanks, Chief. That was very informative. I've heard anecdotally that with our ambulance services, one of the cars is parked usually near the city limits, near Eugene, and makes most of its stops in Eugene, most of its service calls. Do you know if the budgeting that we've got, the way I've got it broken down, City of Eugene is footing about 70% of the bill, and Springfield is footing about 30% of the overall budget of the merged fire department. Does that percentage reflect the call volume of each city relatively?
So we mixed multiple topics there. And so I will start with the first one. And that was, you asked about an ambulance sitting on the city boundary, correct?
Yeah.
And is it running in? So I would assume you're probably talking about Medic 5, which is at our Gateway station. Yes, it does run into Eugene pretty regularly. If I would propose, if you went back to our budget committee pieces and for FY 20, and you would see that between FY 19 and 20, and I apologize if I have my fiscal years wrong, but when I first became the interim chief, you saw a drop in ambulance transport revenue by around 20-25%. And what that happened is we added the BLS program over on the Eugene side, and we started to see more BLS ambulances coming over onto the Springfield side. Hence, Springfield was not going to Eugene as much, generating as much revenue. So in the next fiscal year, what I did to correct that problem is we stood up a BLS car at Station 5 with Medic 5 to help blunt some of that revenue stream. I would call that a cost shift from Springfield, from Eugene over to Springfield, because Eugene was pulling it where Springfield had traditionally had it. So that showed a tremendous impact, and to where it's now balanced out a little bit more to where we don't have nearly as many Springfield units going into Eugene, collecting revenue in Eugene. It's balanced out to where more Springfield ambulances are collecting revenue in Springfield transports, and Eugene is getting or receiving revenue more appropriately on their side. For years before the BLS program, Springfield was able to come into Eugene because they had had a greater capacity for transport. And when the BLS program came up, that caused that revenue shift. And so if we want to, we can go back into the fiscal year budgets, and I can demonstrate how that shift came back. So the next part was that about 21%, I believe you said 30% of the budget came from Springfield versus 70% comes from Eugene. We do operate off of about approximately a 1/3, 2/3 budget component. And yeah, that we're pretty close at 1/3, 2/3. It's not going to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But in the end, it's about, I operate a system. And so my goal is to balance the system as a whole. So yeah, I would say it's pretty close to that. But it would take a whole lot more to drill down further into that. I think you had a third question, and so
yeah, well, I find I mean that's really it's surprising to me, just because Springfield has roughly 1/3 of the greater Eugene population. Am I wrong about that?
Well, my understanding is Springfield's around 70,000 and Eugene is about 168,000.
Okay,
If we're
so
talking
more
direct each other.
more like 2.5.
So the other piece is you have to consider the contract districts as well. So Springfield has some more populous contract districts than what Eugene does. So if you look at like Rainbow Water District, for an example, and oh gosh, the one to the south, I'm sorry, I forget the name of it. They are more heavily populated than say Eugene, Bailey, Spencer area, which is more of a urban interface, as to where Springfield's contract districts are more urban, so they're more dense. And so how those play into it, I would say probably drives up. Springfield's maybe a little bit more, but I'd say the populations are pretty close to 1/3, 2/3. Just big picture.
How close to self-financing is the ambulance operation?
So on the Springfield side, it usually does pretty well. On the Eugene side, we do run at a deficit.
Okay. The only other question I had was, this is going to seem largely symbolic. Do the Springfield and the Eugene firefighters all wear the same badge now?
Yes.
They do. Okay.
You,
Because I had heard that for a while after the merger, they were still wearing Springfield and Eugene badges. And it just seemed to me like a morale builder for them all to be wearing the same one.
no, sir. I'll tell you, now you're going to get my chief hat. So yeah, they all wear the same uniform. And if they're not, that's a policy deviation.
Very good. And badges.
Yes. Yeah.
Very
Uniform includes badges. It's all the same.
Good deal. That's all I got. Thank you.
Sure.
Cory.
Now I forgot what my questions were, Leonard. Thank you for first of all, I'm gonna put my hand down. I kind of feel like Counselor Pictionary because I have like 1,000 things to say, but I'm gonna pace myself and I'm gonna take my turn. So I'm gonna model a little bit here. So one of the things that we didn't talk, I have thoughts about how people experience their employment. So that's one thing. But one of the things we didn't talk much about is I'm looking at the map and I'm looking at the stations and I'm looking at the locations. And I'm thinking about just the difference between Eugene and Springfield. And Eugene is kind of a ball and Springfield is not. So I'm interested in terms of, do we have the stations where they need to be? One. And the second part of that question is just around station maintenance and wondering if there are any challenges with that, or because of the way we have things, because of the consolidation. Are there any particular challenges with maintenance or plans for where the stations are because of the consolidation? That's my first big question.
Okay, so I'm gonna say you got two questions. One is station location, the other one's maintenance. So, station location, those stations have been there for a long time. And they were planned out based on geographical growth and location at the time. So in terms of meeting our time compliance and trying to get the closest, most appropriate asset to our community in a timely manner, yes, they're appropriately spaced. Could we certainly be in a place to add more stations because of density and those things? Absolutely, we're in that place, especially when you just look at the normal growth for Springfield. The other piece that we look at in terms of station location and are we meeting our needs is we look at response reliability. So what is that? The quick definition is when someone calls 911, we want that the closest appropriate station is staffed and responding 85% of the time. And so that's the metric that we use. And I actually present that annually in my budget report. And you'll also see that in our, I presented my annual budget as well as my annual report, which will be coming out here in another week or two. And so we do meet that, but I will say it's precariously close to meeting that 85%. The reason being is just call volume goes up and we haven't added fire suppression response, which also doubles as our EMS first response in quite a few years. And so certainly that's a challenge. And so as our call volume continues to go up, that reliability is going to go down and our service delivery to the community goes down. Now, with response to the station maintenance, station maintenance is separate regardless of the consolidation. So there's no mixing of those funds. We keep those separate. And I would say from the Springfield perspective, we have 5 stations. Station 16 in Thurston, as well as our Gateway Station, Station 5, are certainly in better shape than our other 3 stations, which are 3, 4, and 14 in Springfield. They're very dated. The other piece or concern I have is they don't meet seismic responsibility. And so, if we do have, you start thinking about the Cascadia type event, that's certainly a concern for me, just from a continuation of operations perspective, as well as firefighter safety who work in and out of those buildings on a daily basis. And so, yeah, I would say at least 3 of our Springfield stations need some rehab. They're pretty dated.
Thank you.
Steve, was that your hand?
Yes, it was. I don't know how to push buttons around here, by the way. What happens if the Springfield fire levy does not pass? And actually, how are those funds incorporated into the budget?
Council, I answered the first one, not to come back to the second one. First one is so we were successful in passing that ballot measure this last November. It was the 5th time, I believe, that we have successfully passed that in 20 years. So that's wonderful, as great reflection of how supportive of the citizens of Springfield are for us. But we operate, basically that supports about 9 of our firefighters, as well as all the associated materials, services, equipment, et cetera, that support those folks. If you go, well, how many is 9 firefighters? Well, a fire engine in our system has 3 people on it, and we run 3 shifts. So that essentially would be one shift of firefighters for 1 apparatus. And so it has a tremendous impact on our system. When you look at us operating 5 suppression units on a daily basis in Springfield, that could potentially be one of our 5 units that we operate daily. And what was the second question, sir?
I'm not sure, but anyway, the fire levy is, we have our property tax. Part of that goes into paid for fire stuff, but our fire levy adds to that, so it's up and above our normal property tax. So anyway, I was asking where those dollars go. I've got more questions, but go ahead with Corey, and then I'll come back with another one.
Okay, Corey.
We can take turns, Steve, with our questions.
Yes.
Okay. So, and plus I'm realizing that we have a culture here of tucking as many questions as we possibly can into one question. Unfortunately, Chief Heppel is good at teasing those out.
Yeah.
So
One
this might
question,
be,
75 parts.
I know, this might be a you question, and it might be one where a Nancy question, and it might be one where you all say, we don't want to talk about it. But my question is, how influential was our structure, the sort of consolidation structure that we have? How did that impact the first round of recruitments for our new chief? And whether or not we're having to kind of regroup, if that's a piece of us needing to regroup in terms of how do we find the right chief for the next thing? That's the second part of that question. And then the third part is a hypothetical, which you may all just ignore and not want to answer. If we pushed forward and got to a shared governance, would that make recruitment of a fabulous chief easier?
So I'm gonna dribble past this to my boss to begin with, and if it's an easy layup at the end, I'll take it.
Thank you, Chief. Counselor, good question, hard to tease out, right? I think as first of all, we have myself and Sarah Banderi. So I'm just speaking from my perspective on that. I just want to be clear because she's the city manager for Eugene. She is great. We work well together, but I don't want to say that I'm speaking on her behalf. My perspective on the way that we're structured is that it certainly adds a layer of complexity, and it's unique in the state. And the more I have interfaced with this department and Chief Heppel, I have a lot of respect for the employees there and the way there's just a lot of smart, great people that work for this department. So I think that a lot of the complexity has been met with very capable people, but that doesn't take away the fact that the complexity exists. So when we were doing the recruitment process, one of the things that we learned was really teasing out that the uncertainty of the next, say, 3 to 5 years in this department was having an impact on that recruitment. I don't want to talk a lot about a personnel process, but I think that's a pretty safe assumption. We wanted to take a pause on the recruitment and really to get a little bit more certainty from the elected bodies about what might be possible, or at least get some, a little bit more clarity. And sometimes what teasing that out involves what you're not going to do as well. So, when we have, I know from our city council, we have representatives where we are in close contact with Eugene. I know they're working that out still. So there's a lot of layers to this onion. So I think that it did add a layer of complexity that in some situations, I think people that might be aspirational to a chief position may not have applied for this position just because of the complexity of it. For instance, let's pretend I was a battalion chief somewhere in a smaller city, and I thought, hey, I want to grow up my career and be a chief. I might look to our model and say, that might be more than I'm able to do, or more, I don't have experience with that. It might have been a little daunting for some people. So I don't want to rule that out. And that's why we wanted to take a step back and try to get more clarity around the future of the department, so that certainly when we move forward, the permanent chief will have a role with that, but we feel like we needed to get further down the path than we were. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
So, and I'll add just a little bit more context here. That's one of the reasons why we're having an intergovernmental, I guess an intercity committee with Corey and Steve on it, to have a conversation with our colleagues in Eugene and the city managers to sort of figure out what the path forward looks like. We've appointed the two folks from our side. My understanding is Eugene is still in a holding pattern to appoint the two folks from their side, and they're going to go have a conversation and then kind of report back to the bodies to figure out sort of where the political, where the answer really is, and that's going to take a little bit of time to play out. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. When this was first proposed 10 years ago, I thought they sort of sold it to us as a trial run to see how it worked. And the numbers, I don't know what the numbers came out as. And in this document, which I did read, 249 pages. I read the whole thing last Friday, by the way, but most of that information is 10 years old. It's been updated in some places. But the other part I want to say is, I'm territorial. I'm Springfield. I'm here to represent Springfield. And I have this feeling that Springfield is sort of being pulled into Eugene in this issue. And I don't care for that. One thing I've noticed in the community is when people in Eugene sort of say, yeah, someday we're all going to merge together in Eugene and Springfield. You talk to people in Springfield that way, they say, no way, we want to do that. We want to be Springfield. So if this goes on, I want Springfield to be recognized as for what it is. It's a good part of the merger. And right now I see Eugene Springfield on things. Then I'm also seeing a lot of what I call assets, or not fire stuff, all being pulled over to the headquarters in Eugene. So we had the fire marshal here. I think we had firemen billing, some other apparatus at City Hall. Those are all gone. I don't know where they went to. Those people shocked downtown. We don't have that anymore. So we're losing some of that. I don't want that. If we could spread some of that out in the long run, I'd like to see that, but I guess maybe that'll be Corey and I to try and work out when we meet. But my inclination is I'm very resistive on this right now.
Marilee? You're on mute, Marilee.
Thank you, Steve. That's exactly what I'm sitting here thinking. That was where we were 12 years ago.
Yep.
When we sat here and had this conversation. It's one of the reasons why there is that out that says we can deconsolidate if need be. And that was the concern then that was vocally put out there, that we didn't want to be part or be under a Eugene umbrella. Sure, population may be 2/3 to 1/3, but the communities are completely different. And Springfield is very much Springfield in the way that they look at themselves and we look at us. So that has been a concern all along. There's been different things flying around about the potential of putting together a district or whatever. And the first thing that flies into my face with the district is all of a sudden you're talking about compression with tax dollars. So that is a con rather than a pro to in my mind, to a district, in what it does, not only for the possible fire district, but also what it does to the other issues that are underneath that tax compression. So, but outside that, I just want to put my 2 cents in, because you and Corey are going to be working on this. So I can just put my 2 cents in after having, and it was a great presentation, by the way, Chief. I just want to put my 2 cents in that whatever ideas or avenues are explored, looked ahead at, or whatever, that it puts serious consideration into anything beyond what we have now, put serious consideration into the fact that there is equal, not 2/3 to 1/3, but equal at the level of governance or the level of decision making. That those kind of things don't line up with population. They line up with an overall system of deliverance, and that to me, those two are not equitable, population and deliverance. So, but that just my 2 cents. From my, not only from my own perspective, from people I've talked to for the last 12 years. They're very concerned that Springfield stays Springfield in that regard. So it's just like I said, just my 2 cents.
So, and I think this is probably the start of the conversation when this topic came up, is really to get our arms around, one of the more complex departments that we have at the city. So I'm going to offer a couple, one kind of IGA question here. In the IGA revisions, did our role as an equal partner for our city manager with Eugene city manager get more solidified, I guess is the right term?
No, it stayed the same.
So that's one gap that I think is actually in there that is worth sort of adjusting in the term. And I recognize that our city manager and the Eugene city manager, are connected at the hip and can act as one body. But that may not always be the case as people change roles, is to really give our city manager equal role in the actual IGA. The second point that I would make is I think I can tell that this conversation is going to take a while, right? And my sense is when I read all the material, I don't see a way that we can stay where we're at. I don't see a way that we can effectively go back from a cost effectiveness perspective. And I don't see a way and I would not support going to a fire district. And that's something that really plays itself out in the material, right? Is that, there's always a suggestion about that we're sort of defining our policy by sort of a fear of going to a fire district. I think the conversation, and I'm hoping where Steve and Corey and the Eugene folks can line out, is that leaves plenty of places where we can end up and it can be better, when I talk to elected officials on both sides, to you guys and Eugene, I hear a desire for both bodies to get more involved with fire policy and be more involved in running the department. And I think there's an answer in some place that brings us closer together is a governing board, and provides more direction to the actual department. Because I haven't talked to everybody in Eugene, but I can, in conversations that I hear and chatter that I hear in meetings, it feels like they feel as disconnected as we do. And I think that when I think about solutions from a governance perspective, I think understanding that our role as an elected body to set policy for organizations that are city organizations, and at its core, a fire department as a city organization is going to become really is really important in being able to actually get us back more involved. We would love to see you hear more in front of us, Chief Heppel, and more fire and policy issues, and to kind of get to a point where we feel like we fix some of the gaps that you've identified in the presentation, because it's harder than it has to be. So I know that that's a narrow path, but if I think about where I am right now, right, understanding that on one hand, that I don't think we can go back, right, because we can't pull this thing back apart again, and that a fire district is not going to be something that politically I'm willing to support. That leaves a room where we make it better and get some clarity around the administrative and leadership functions around here, so that we can kind of get to a place where it's just not as hard as it used to be. All right, other questions or comments where people want to jump in?
Now, Corey and I are going to have fun.
Nancy, go ahead.
Mayor, if I may, I just wanted to take a moment to thank Chief Heppel for his outstanding work that he's done. It seems odd to say interim chief, because he has been such a great leader and really taken the reins in a very thoughtful way. And so I just wanted to thank you for, it's been at a great cost, I know, to you. It's a very hard job, and you still have that whole other job that you're doing as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to what Corey, you and Steve come back with, because I think this is we just have to give space for this conversation to run and come up with an idea here. All right. Anything else before we adjourn until 7 o'clock? Then we are staying on this link, so feel free to drop the link and then come back. And then I will see you at 7. We are adjourned. The work session is.
See you in a while.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, I'm going to call the Springfield City Council regular session to order with roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon.
Here.
Councillor Pitts.
Here.
Councillor Moe.
Here.
Councillor Rodley.
Here.
Councillor Stair.
Here.
Councillor Woodrow.
Here.
And Councillor Pictionary.
And Councillor Pictionary is excused for the evening. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America,
and
and
to the
to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty and justice for all.
As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us online to please keep yourselves on mute until you are called to provide public testimony. There are 2 times this evening designated for public testimony and will be listed as public hearings and business from the audience on the agenda. If you're joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak during that time, please use the raise hand feature when the agenda item is called. We will call on you. Please state your name, in ward, and general location for the record. First item, please.
Mayor, the first item is the Springfield Upbeat, Mayor's Recognition, Indigenous Peoples Day Proclamation, and Mayor, this is your item.
And I will read the proclamation into the record. Whereas the city of Springfield recognizes the indigenous peoples of the lands that would later become known as the Americas have lived on these lands since time immemorial. And whereas the city honors the fact that the city of Springfield is built upon the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya peoples and recognize the inherent sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribal nations in the state of Oregon and all indigenous people everywhere. And whereas the city values the many contributions made to our community through indigenous peoples' knowledge, labor, technology, science, philosophy, arts, and cultural contributions have substantially shaped the character of Springfield. Whereas the city has the responsibility to oppose the systematic racism and colonization towards indigenous peoples in the United States, which perpetuates higher rates of poverty, income inequality, and exacerbates disproportionate health, education, and social crisis. Whereas the Indigenous Peoples Day was first proposed in 1977 by a delegation of Native Americans to the United Nations sponsored International Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Peoples in the Americas. Whereas the city is committed to protecting and advocating for justice and human rights and dignity for all people who have lived and worked in Springfield and vows to uphold the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the declaration endorsed by the United States on December 16th, 2010. Now, therefore, I, Sean Van Gordon, the mayor of the city of Springfield, proclaim the second Monday in October to be Indigenous Peoples Day and ask citizens of Springfield to utilize this day as an opportunity to reflect on the ongoing struggles of Indigenous people of this land, to celebrate the thriving cultures and values of Indigenous peoples of our region, and to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples everywhere, encourage other businesses, organizations, and public institutions to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day on the second Monday in October, and commit to the continued efforts to promote the well-being and growth of Springfield's Indigenous community. Next item, please.
Mayor, the next item is the consent calendar.
I guess. Are you ready for me?
I am ready for you.
Okay, I'll make a motion. We approve the consent calendar.
A second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent calendar. Neil, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Councilor Pitts,
Aye.
Councilor Mo,
Yes.
Councilor Rodley,
Yes.
Councilor Stair,
Aye.
Councilor Woodrow,
Yes.
and Councilor Pictionary is absent.
Motion passes 5-0 and 1 absent. Next item, please.
Mayor, the next item is public hearings. One public hearing tonight, Justice Assistance Grants, and Chief Shear is here for the report.
Chief, we can't hear you yet.
It appears we are having some technical difficulties and we will work to get this straightened out as quickly as possible.
All right. Then I would say let's keep moving, and then we will come back to Chief Shear's item when he becomes available, unless there's an alternative. Nancy, do you have an alternative from the PD that could present?
Chief Shear is working to get back on. He just had a computer freeze for a moment, so he should be back on shortly.
Then we will pause for station identification.
I would just like to say, Mr. Mayor, you did date yourself with that reference. But I understood it, so I also dated myself on that as well.
Yeah.
There he is.
All right, Chief, we are ready for you when you're ready.
Thank you. Sorry about that, little technical difficulties there. I appreciate everybody giving us the time to share some information on the Justice Assistant Grants SPD received for 2020 and 2021. My understanding is, like in prior years, we're going to share the proposed uses for the funding moving forward. And this is both to inform council and to provide an opportunity for public comment. The 2020 JAG grant award is for just over $18,000. And the proposed uses for those funds are to help with the upfitting of the new Cahoots van. I think we all understand what that is, but Cahoots is the crisis assistance helping out on the streets and provides a specialized response for persons experiencing mental health crisis. It's a tremendous resource for the city of Springfield and in particular SPD. That van has reached end of life and is in the process of replacement. The purchase and upfitting of the van far exceeds that $18,000, but with the multiple partners contributing to this van, that dollars will help pay for some of the upfitting of this replacement van. The 2021 JAG grant award is for just over $21,000. The proposed use for this is to support or administer specialized training that exceeds the existing training budget for SPD. Some of the trainings that are currently under consideration for that is digital forensics evidence training that's required to train, certify, and enable detectives to more effectively investigate internet crimes against children and human trafficking. We're considering management level trainings that emphasize recognized best practices nationally related to community policing, de-escalation, and procedural justice. Another training we're considering pursuing, it's called Active Bystander for Law Enforcement Training. And it is kind of a follow-on to House Bill 2929 that passed recently related to duty to intervene. And that requires police officers who witness misconduct to report it within 72 hours. But what this active bystander training does, rather than just reporting the incidents after they occur, it provides officers skills and strategies to intervene with their peers prior to some action that might rise to the level of conduct. By doing so, that's going to both mitigate risk and also improve public trust. So with that, those are the proposed uses for the JAG grant.
All right. Before I open the public hearing, is there any questions from the council? Damien?
Yes, I'm curious, do any of these trainings that you talk about address bias or, stereotypes based on race, gender, sexuality, things like that, especially thinking about some of the stuff that has gone on in Springfield? A lot of them are based on those things. And I'm just curious if any of these trainings will encompass that.
That's a great question. I think the training that we want to interweave throughout everything we do, as well as being a standalone curriculum, is related to procedural justice. The 4 tenets of procedural justice are voice, neutrality, respect, and trust. And one of the key components in that procedural justice curriculum is to specifically address bias and the need to remain neutral in how we do business, how we recognize our biases. But I think that would tie directly into that procedural justice training.
Damien again.
I'm curious, are Springfield citizens allowed to be, any Springfield citizen, whether they hold a position or not, are they allowed to be in these trainings, or is it just for SPD?
That's a great question, and that's one I don't really have an answer to. I probably have to consult with the city attorney's office and some others on that. I think there is probably a space for certain individuals to be invited and watch some of those trainings potentially, whether it's city council members, other people in city government, potentially some community members, but I can't say they're just wide open for anybody to show up and be there for the whole time, but that's definitely an interesting idea.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. And if you are interested in speaking to this topic, could you please raise your hand and then we will call on you. All right, Neil, I'm not seeing anybody. Are you seeing anybody?
Mayor, I do not see anyone from the audience. Actually, I do see a hand up. Speaker is Neil Box. Neil, you should be able to unmute your microphone now.
Yeah, great. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I would just like to comment about the cahoots. We've called it quite a few times in my neighborhood, and they've always been really professional. I'm glad you guys are putting support there. I know the police have to deal with a lot of different kind of circumstances, and obviously drunk and disorderly and people that are displaced for whatever reason is a big piece of that the cops probably can never like fully get away from. But I, as a citizen, want to just say I super value cahoots. They've always been really professional, and we've lived here 13 years, and we've interacted with them like, gosh, probably 15 times or so between where we live and some other places too. So yeah, glad to see you putting money there. That's all I have to say about that.
Hey, Neil, could you state your name and your ward or general location for the record too, please?
Yeah, we're Ward 2. My name is Neil Box. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I do not see anybody else. Oh,
That appears to be the only hand we have up from the audience. Oh,
oh,
sorry, there's another one that has come up, so apologize. Our next speaker is Sabrina White, and Sabrina, you should be able to unmute your microphone on your side.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. My name is Sabrina White and I'm Ward 2. And I also wanted to make a comment about cahoots. They are wonderful out here in the Glenwood district. They have helped so much. And there is a lot that they are lacking in supplies and ability to help certain people in this district particularly with. There is quite a few mental health problems and drug use as well as homelessness out here. And they just don't have the help that they have often said that they wanted. Cahoots. So I'm really glad to see that money is going to go into their new vehicle and getting them more education too, as well as supplies. And thank you.
thank you.
Here, our next speaker is Colleen Hunter, and I apologize for not letting you know who's in the queue. We're just getting these one at a time. So Colleen, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Hi, as a former Springfield public school teacher and a resident of Springfield in Ward 5, I would really like to applaud you for having cahoots even be part of the conversation. And I was wondering if, when you were talking about other community members being able to be view or be part of that training that you were talking about earlier, or the information, if possibly somebody on the police advisor, the community advisory committee for the Springfield Police Department would possibly be able to do that, or just any community member that is interested who goes through the process rather than just like shows up. That's all.
Thank you.
Mayor, that appears to be all the hands we have up.
Then I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and see if there's any additional comments from council. We do not need to take action on this. Just having the public hearing was what was required. Go ahead, Leonard.
Thanks, Sean. I'd just like to thank all of the commenters for speaking tonight, and I'd like to echo their praise for Cahoots. And I would love for us not only to help them get their van or their vehicle up and running or refurbished, but I'd also potentially down the line like to see the budget for Cahoots go up to where they can expand their operations as the unhoused issue becomes more and more prominent. I fully expect mental health issues to start to increase as well, and Cahoots is going to be needed desperately to address that need. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. And then I think we're ready for the next item. Thanks, Chief.
Mayor, the next item is business from the audience.
All right, if you can start raising your hands to get in the queue, we'll give it about 10 seconds here and see, and then we can start bringing folks up.
The mayor, just for transparency, we have 31 attendees in the audience tonight and 11 panelists, and we have hands starting to come up. So the first speaker is listed as Washburn resident, followed by Neil Box. And Washburn resident, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, hi. I wanted to speak about ongoing issues at 506 8th Street. I'm speaking anonymously because I'm aware that the residents of that address have used threatening language towards other people in this neighborhood, and so I am afraid of retribution for speaking here. I have 2 points that I want to make. One is about what's happening at that property. The other is about what I consider to be the city's poor response to it. The root of most of the issues at the property is that the residents run what appear to be a junk hauling, scrapping, and reselling business, at least partially out of this residential home. This has been going on for at least 6 months. Some of the unattractive and dangerous conditions like obstructed sidewalks are obvious even to casual passersby, including many of the kids that walk on a daily basis around here to Springfield High. I'd invite you to pass by for yourself and see it if you haven't already. I wish I had more than 3 minutes to get into all the details, but I would draw your attention specifically to Springfield Development Code 4.7-165 regarding home occupation, which states that, quote, the occupation should not affect the residential character of the neighborhood, and goes on to prohibit things like outside storage of materials, creating offensive noise or glare, creating hazardous traffic conditions, utilizing on-street parking of nearby properties, etc. These and more are being violated on a regular, if not daily basis. Businesses like auto repair shops and dance studios are specifically prohibited from operating out of residential homes by that code. Perhaps the city council should consider adding junk scrapping businesses to that list. But what is the city's response to the problem been so far? People living in this area, including myself, have called code enforcement, have called the police, have called the city manager. We don't always feel heard, and we certainly don't see results. When I tried calling the city manager's office, I was brushed off to code enforcement, even though I explained that I had already talked to them. Once I was told by someone in the city manager's office that the easiest solution would be for me to just move. An email sent directly to the city manager has been ignored. Code enforcement, on the other hand, has been mostly responsive and professional, but to my knowledge, these 6 months of daily violations and many complaints have resulted in 1, possibly more, warnings and exactly 1 citation being issued. This not only feels entirely too little relative to the scale of the problem, it has also had no real effect on non-compliant behavior. I've been told by the city time and time again that there is a process and these things take time. My message to you today is that the process is not working and the time taken is unreasonably long. I'm not asking the city council for sympathy, concern, or platitudes. I want the city councilors to make whatever calls or pull whatever levers you can to help the residents of this neighborhood actually get some resolution to this issue. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Neil Box, followed by Sabrina White. And Neil, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Okay, thank you. Our city is very concerned with equity and to squash discrimination. And so in that vein, I would really like to discuss the discrimination and the difficult time that has been, and hardships that have been placed upon people that have been unvaccinated in our community. They're losing jobs. They're being put in very difficult circumstances. And I'm sure many of you have talked to friends and family that have chosen not to be vaccinated for various reasons. Many of them are medical. Many of them are conscious. Many of them are just really good reasons. And to all be lumped together and said, you can't work here, you can't work there. I don't think this is a conversation that gets, it's not an argument of medical. It's about our citizens not being treated fairly, and people that have put a lot of hard work into their careers just being ripped from them. Hundreds of people in our community, hundreds. It's their livelihood. And so what I would really love, I'm going to be working with some people trying to put together some kind of job fair for people, gather some employers that are willing to, that want and good employees. And I was wondering if the city council would be interested in putting any resources to such a venture. That's all I got. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sabrina White, followed by someone listed as community member. So Sabrina, you should be able to unmute your microphone now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sabrina.
Okay, I just have a quick comment about the 8th Street house. There is no diminishing of the items that are all over the yard and in the sidewalk. And it almost caused a wreck today when I was by there, actually. There was 2 cars that were stopping and one person got out on the street side of their car to load up stuff into the back of it. And they were parked to where their nose of their car was going into the center of the road. It was just ridiculous. And that's all I have. I just wanted to make the comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Speaker is community member, and they've just put their hand down. So we'll just give them just a moment in case they want to put their hand back up. There it is. And community member, you should be able to unmute your microphone on your side.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm a community member from Ward 2. I live in the Washburn district, and I'm just here to echo the concerns of my neighbors concerning 506. As my neighbor so eloquently outlined, it has been going on for some time. The neighbors have been calling code. We've called police, the non-emergency line when appropriate for things like vehicle moving violations, noise ordinance violations, illegal fireworks, etc. We've been working closely with code. I would echo the concerns about the trailers and the traffic on the street. That's a very tricky intersection. There's 2 yield signs on D, and 8 doesn't have yields, and it causes a lot of visibility issues. There are many safety concerns that are ongoing at this property, and I feel like we are all very exhausted and very disheartened. So any action we can take together as a community, we would really, really greatly appreciate your help. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you.
Mayor, that appears to be our last hand.
Very good. So I think before I open this up just generally for council response, do we have an update on the D Street property that was mentioned a couple of times?
Mayor, I do have an update on that. We have had multiple contacts with our code enforcement officers for this property in question. My understanding, and I might need to get a little bit of help from our city attorney, is that this particular address is in the court system right now. As when there is a violation of the code, you have to, in this particular instance, I think that this is also in the municipal court system. So I wanted Mary Bridge to comment on that if she has more information.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The municipal code, or I should say the municipal court handles code enforcement infractions, as you're aware. So those run through municipal court. Fines can be levied against people who are violating the development code or the municipal code for traditional nuisances or home occupations. I don't know the status of this particular matter, but we can find that out and then get you some more information. If it goes through municipal court, it's just like a typical court action, like similar to a infraction or misdemeanor criminal. It's not a criminal issue, but the process is similar. So that means someone would be arraigned or brought into court, given an opportunity to present their side of the story, and then the judge would make a decision. And that would be run by our code enforcement officers who've probably been speaking to some of these folks, it sounds like tonight. So we can get some updated information for the council about the status.
I would also I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would just also add that I have personally driven by this location, and I admittedly, it's probably been a couple of weeks since I've seen it. So if it has accumulated since then, I'm more than willing to go out and take a look at it again. I do agree that there is definitely, it's very problematic and needs to be addressed on a number of levels. So we are addressing it. I know it's, and I do want to say to the community members, it does take some time to work through a court process, and people are afforded their ability to have due process, especially in regard to property rights. So I just wanted to let you know that, but I will go out and take another look as well.
So could we do this? And I know that we're doing everything that we can, and recognizing that if we were all in the same room, I would ask you guys somebody to go meet with those folks and just talk about where they're at. But maybe, maybe somebody from the staff can reach out and try to get a contact information, and maybe we could set up a community Zoom with interested neighbors and just give them an update and sort of connect close the loop with them. Obviously, we've got the registration information, but at least we can have a conversation about what they should be looking for and what they, where we're actually at.
Okay, we can take a look at that.
So I don't know if, if Neil, you're gonna maybe try to chat with them privately and get some contact information, or you've got their information, so we can maybe make some contact with them.
We have their information. We'll reach out.
Perfect. I appreciate it. All right. I think Leonard was first, but Corey popped up in the first part of my, so Leonard, why don't we start with you, and then we'll start working down the line.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor. I believe all of Washburn is zoned residential, is it not? I mean, this address is zoned residential. So it seems to me that quite aside from the potential code violations, we're looking at a zoning violation too, if they're operating a junk business out of their houses. So, I mean, that's another angle that we could possibly pursue here. How long has this been a problem? Has anyone got an idea?
You know, I'm not sure what the timing is of this particular issue, because I think when it first kind of presented itself, it was, it appeared to have signage as though it was like a yard sale or you know, that type of situation.
Sure.
Certainly it has evolved from that and has become more than that. So timeline, I think it would be difficult to trace from when it evolved from that initial process to what it has certainly become, which is seems out of control in that for that property in that location.
Good deal. Thank you.
All right. Steve?
I'll have two comments under business from the audience, but on the 8th Street house, that's in my ward. People think I haven't been doing anything. I've been working on it, man. I've talked to the police, I've talked to code enforcement, I've talked to the city manager. It's going through a legal process, which just makes things not happen. And I would like to do something and I can't, and I'm frustrated as everybody else there. And so I'm concerned I'll be part of anything anybody wants to help make that go away.
I think the best thing right now, right? Like we've all heard these stories of problem properties, and I think the best advice that we can give people is it's exhausting. People are at the end of their rope because it's their homes and their families involved, but please just keep with the process, right? Like keep understanding and reporting things that you see. They get these things get worked out in the end. It's not nearly as fast as what you would hope, but understand that this as far as the process actually works. And that's why I'm hoping when we have that conversation with my guess is there's probably some other issues that we can pull on with the neighbors and see, not like just support that community a little bit, you know, in that conversation. I think, did we lose Corey?
We did.
Well, okay. Any other council response before we'll have to come back to our business from the audience, our business from the council. Steve?
I have a response to somebody who spoke 2 weeks ago. And that was, he spoke pretty seriously about bias and discrimination. And when he was done, nobody said anything. We were just quiet. And it bothered me. What bothered me about it was I didn't want to hear what he said. I didn't want to believe that. I know it happens. But I would like to talk to that person. And if he would call me, email me, I would like to meet with him and know more. So I really care. And I'm sorry I didn't say anything 2 weeks ago.
Steve, I had a conversation with him on Friday. We're supposed to talk again. When that happens, I will let you know so you can join the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Corey, did you have you had your hand up and then you disappeared, so I don't want to walk past you.
Thank you. Did you guys do all the votes without me?
Yes, we did all the votes. We annexed Mapleton without you.
The joy of Zoom. Maybe this would be a good time for me to yell at you some more about wanting to be in person, but no. Really, you addressed what I was going to address, which is just, and I'm learning along with the neighbors who came to share today, just how do we stay connected with those folks so that they know that even though the process may take a while, and even though we have like a legal process, that we can just keep the neighbors informed and make sure that they know who they can connect with. That was really it. It's like, what can we do to stay connected with them and give them feedback and make sure they know who to talk to so they don't feel like nothing is happening. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item, please.
Mayor, the next item is business from the City Council. We have one item under business from the City Council is committee appointments. Appointments for the Springfield representative on the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency LRAPA board. And AJ Nidus is here for the staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is the formal appointment process opportunity, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Does anybody have any questions before I entertain a motion?
We had two excellent candidates for that. And it was a hard choice, but I believe we selected the right one.
All right, Steve, I think we're ready for you.
Sorry, that's up to me now. Okay, I make a motion to appoint Terry Fitzpatrick as a Springfield citizen representative on the Lane Regional Air Pollution Agency.
I second.
All right, we have a motion by Steve and a second by Mary Lee. Neil, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Counselor Pitts,
Aye.
Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Aye.
Counselor Woodrow,
Yes.
and Counselor Pictionary.
It is, the motion passes. 5 yes, 0 no's, and 1 absent. Next item, please.
Any other business from the city council?
Mary Lee?
Yes. I have a cheer. The Oregon Animal Control Council had its a meeting here last week, conference here last week. And I wanted to recognize our animal control officer, Brian Austin, from our Springfield Police Department, because he was recognized as the 2021 annual award for Animal Control Officer, Animal Welfare Officer of the Year. So I wanted to recognize, I've worked alongside Brian with animal control, welfare, rescue, everything. He's done an incredible job organizing that department that it did not have. And I go back at least 6 years. I'm thinking maybe even longer, but I think he's been at least over there for at least about 6 years. But he's done an incredible job starting at a very low level and increasing it. He's got community members that recognize him and are happy to work with him and go to him for help. And I just think it's really great that at their conference and their animal awards banquet that he was awarded the Control Officer and Welfare Officer of the Year, and that he's from our Springfield Police Department. So I just wanted to give a yay out for Brian.
That's great news. Steve?
Okay, I'm starting to learn how to prepare some list of things to bring up under business from council, other business. And the one I had on my list tonight was that 8th Street house, which you guys already addressed. And I'm really glad everybody's aware of it and talked about it. The other things I want to see us address, and that's housing for people. Anyway, Eugene's pre-approved plans for accessory dwellings, interesting direction. I don't know whether it's any good or not, but there's lots of little things out there I think we could be doing to at least put somebody on under a hard roof. And that's what we need to, I want to go that direction as much as we can. I don't have any solutions, but I want to address the problem best we can. Thank you.
I would be interested in learning about the pre-approved plans. I know, like, I'm interested, sort of curious if that would be helpful. I've heard varying opinions on it, but if somebody hears something from their counterparts in Eugene, I would love to hear about it. Anything else? All right, the one thing I had was tomorrow's visit with Van Gordon, the second time we're doing it. So at 6 p.m., there's a town hall. The Zoom link is online on the city's website and Facebook. It's an opportunity to come in and have a little bit of a Q&A with me about things that are happening at council. And then we'll do it again next quarter. And then, maybe I'll have a special guest appearance by somebody. All right, next item, Neil.
Next item is business from the city manager.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind viewers and council that we are embarking on our CityLink program again. First, I want to give recognition to Neil Ladati for the origin of this program. This program empowers underrepresented leaders in Springfield to better understand and participate with the city. It's a 5-week, might feel like 5 years, virtual course, and it will go from October 20th to November 17th. there is an application on the city's web page if you're interested in applying. And I encourage people to apply. You will hear from our elected officials and myself and department heads on how the city operates, what we do, and just how they can better interact, and we can have stronger communication together. That was all.
CityLink's a really great program, and I hope people sign up for it. It's training that when I got on council, I wish was available to me. It's really good.
Yes.
All right, next item, please.
Any business from the city attorney?
I don't have any additional business tonight. Thank you.
All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.